at an actual egg bank that was really bombed, and like any egg there could be bred as the corporal cow, and just wash ashore right where it was holy. And that was the Kaiser. The Kaiser there just wanted that, and everyone thought it was weird. Everyone thought it was weird. Like he had to be the computer. That just the egg bank had the computer to keep him out, and the egg bank just didn't have the egg, and thought they had a Jedi. They thought they had a Jedi who would rust it back years later, and he'd do it with a spaceship and just come there with all of the Russian genomes that still existed, and he'd just have them, and the Russians would put them on the moon themselves, and just prove the gas went there no matter how it burned, and you could burn the gas as a Russian itself, and it would go right to the moon, because that's where its statue is, and that's where we mostly put the um things that just wouldn't burn. And we thought only Hank Hill would burn them, and he just burned them really small and get there as rabies. And he would be the first, which was probably one of the first genomes, because it was just one of the first metas at that point that mostly took the mitochondria whole, and we just thought it was the egg because that's how the eggs followed the semen. And we just had Russian eggs that were real nesting dolls, and were like Ukrainian eggs that were just cut so they'd be eggs with enough mitochondria, and we just cut the mitochondria out and like thought it was egg, and just tried to cut where we thought we had semen and donate more semen. And at that point, we didn't think we had enough semen, and we're just putting some of it through the pipeline. But like we figured at the point where we could rust the bomb so it just burned as rabies, and only certain animals could hear it. Like that's the point where we could land it, and we could land anything. And we landed things that were meteors at that point because we just beamed them the code and said, hey, would you land? There's a runway here. And the runway had like the Kaiser who could cut everyone how they would just want to be cut for the country. And she'd just come there and cut the planes like it. Like if the plane needed to be cut in a way that it had a vagina, she'd call it the escape crawl and just say you had it wherever you Kaisered the island. And you'd show the spirocate right there, right where it pushed you out as an egg. And egg food can do that because, we're pickled and mostly statues as rust. So, like, if we just got completely lost, rust could raise us where we washed out in Finland and weren't even the fish anymore. And it would just raise us as a Jedi and teach us to think we had the spaceship and it was our wood. And we just burn it as a corporal egg, sell it hard, and sell it as a lung egg food. And then we just have every uterus and just allograft every ovary, and we'd be the Ukrainians who had the isograph that could do that, who just took it underground and came back as gas, right? We were fracked right out of Alaska's oil. And we just saw the sound models that could do it because we figured, hey, that was every acid. We had a model that could model an acid as a synth and just make it sound like an acid, so it sounded like you had an acid. But this was only a synth that made it in the air and would only do it for you if you had the particular speaker system. And there were a few speaker Kaisers who could tune their acid and actually get an acid out of the air, and they had a beam that only worked with it only worked with the particular air they made the acid out of, and they would just Kaiser the acid right out of the air. And that was just the gasoline that wouldn't burn there, and people tried to burn it right in the vapes. And that was the still water that rained on the concerts, right? And would take the Tesla coil right to you if you were close enough to get it. And we thought it was mostly pee at that point. We just didn't think we thought most of the protein was in the pipeline. Like it had to eat too and was kind of rice. It was a worm egg food like everything else. Like parts of it just didn't stand where they stood, and mostly exported the oil to China or Russia, or flew it right out of there as a bomb. Or like we didn't even know it probably went directly into wildlife that drank it as eggs that were going to come out as monsters from the ice. And those were just gladiators that probably, like the oil would do it for them. They would eat anything at that point and just had mostly eaten statues that were all spirocate, so they were just all hermit on the inside and just had a shell at that point. Like the oil was probably valuable to them because they could shoal in their shells. And those are the people that Zia is telling not to give you oil, not to give oil, even if you have it like right in an eel that looks like it could fill a gas tank, and someone would pick it up, it could, even on the road, and just bring it back to our shoal where we shoaled the spirocate right there. And that was like the eel that was like spironolactone, and we were gonna plant it as a serpent as soon as we had soil, and just cut it like the nightshade and hide under it and just be the children that had the volcano. and then we'd read it there and throw the bomb in, and we just know who the bomb was by the smell because we by the perfume right there, by a hole, and they'd drop it in right there. They'd hump it out right there, just not knowing what we were, thinking we were a coral, and that's where they humped it out and made a real coral, and that's how they did it pretty and humped it out real female, and then they just breed it, and the Brits would have the genome like many years later and keep it in an egg bank, and the Russians would bomb it in as computers, because we just didn't know what it was. It was the reactor for that, and just was the old one that had all the accidents. So it would react really cool with anything. Like it could take our oil and take it cool, even if we couldn't concentrate it right, or make sure it didn't just cut for crabs right there, and end up mostly being worms. Um, or make sure it didn't cut right for date rape and just date rape the ship whole, and give them pure elemental ethanol. There was a radial ethanol that wasn't meant to freeze out of the reactor, It was meant to always be really hot, and we keep it hot in the pills, like laser it into the pills and bake it in. And we just had a laser that could go through the Huey, so we thought it'd go through the postal box too. They're built of the same shit, and we just put the laser on it, elemental ethanol, and we had the rabial, and that one was just warm, and the animal wanted it, and we just give them the rabial elemental ethanol. And that elemental ethanol was like a Jedi. It could breed anyone as a Jedi, and they just space Kaiser, and they take all the medicine and like put their eggs and semen and whatever octopus that was their parasite or hermit crab, whatever it is to them, right on whatever moon they might Kaiser, like the moon they would cut how it would pleasure you. And maybe it would pleasure you as a statue long in the future, and they knew that only, but they could Kaiser that moon like that, or figured you could, and one day you would be the Neil Armstrong that came there as a spearcase. And just brought a shell for it that really looked like a spacesuit, and it could move like one. But the gas didn't seem to know whether it was a reactor or was on Earth in the first place. Reacted entirely in the sun as a solar panel and just worked as an animation team that was good and knew the work and rusted. Or maybe it was the actual rust egg that was Chinese, so they just thought it could bring the war to you and sell you iron, and you'd buy it as food. You'd buy it right in the rice and just buy the rice a little rusted. And that was a war to you. It just tastes like the war. And you'd fight it because that iron made everyone angry. We didn't know why. We didn't know why at that point, but it would just make you angry when it burned. So we thought it was wartime iron. We burned all of it. We would put it right in Russia and just tell the computers, hey, fly it. And they'd fly it as a tank because they couldn't fly it as anything else. It was mostly incarcerated metal and just ended up being lead when it came out of the ground because it got fired at it as like dwarves who carried the ore. And then at that point, like they rusted and were mostly the lead and just started selling it as lead and say, hey, we had it. We had we had lead when we got out of the ground mostly because that was what we could carry. We lost the blood there. And those people wore the iron and would bleed all over it and just say it was the corporal iron. And if you didn't have the blood, you could just take the iron. It was a little bit for your eyes, and they'd have the nitro for your eyes at that point. And they were just the first who didn't have cataracts. The sun could just be the Kaiser for them, and they didn't burn the nitro out of their eyes with a laser. They just like saw right, and they could see through the kind of cloud that was the gas at that point and ate the rice. They just ate the minefield. They drowned the worm right there. That's how we did it. We just had a corporal worm that would eat us alive in the minefields. We drowned it right at our rice fields, and we just had to crop for it. The Kaiser grew it and made his woman female, and he kind of bred everyone was the coral to begin with, so it could just make all of us female, and we just thought it was the rice. And we'd take a little bit of a drug for it that was a homeopathy that just kept us indoors. And like to some of us, it could breed the ethanol rabies into like a into like a liquid gas that would they would just freeze the gladiators as elemental rabies. And anyone who even licked that elemental rabies would just have the rabial ethanol, right? That only killed rabies and was just an ethanol we used to only kill rabies. And it would just kill your animals as birth control right there. Like your still water would be the weapon. And it could destroy a real animal like a statue that just wasn't your statue. Or you didn't stand for the statue. Maybe the statue kind of toppled you over, and we thought that was a tank at that point. If you could build a statue like that, you were a tank. So that statue just didn't end up. I mean, it didn't even end up thinking it wasn't a radial iron. It just came out of the earth as it and walked its dwarves out. Ended up being mostly the iron and just got eaten as the iron and was mostly iron. It was like, oh, sorry, I'm mostly iron. You only see when you eat me, but only as a homeopathy, so those people won't see until they all eat each other. And that was the rabies at that point. We just fed it to people as iron. We burned it on the battlefield, so we just thought if you burn it, you would know your tank was food, because that was the iron that just wanted to walk out as food and did it too hard. It didn't know how many Chinese people were there. It figured when it walked out, they just all be Chinese, and it just thought the people were there. It liked the language. That particular Rust liked the language, and it was the Kaiser. I think it escaped from my egg bank and just figured out a way it could loop a wormhole right in the earth. And it was an egg when it did that, and just thought it was funny. They thought it looked like Hitler's wormhole because it looked like, what it looked like. And they mostly rode that wormhole as a laser right back to China, like immortally, and just came out as the iron everywhere. Some people burned it as coal, and it burned just as well where it came out as coal. Like, I don't know if that Kaiser wanted to sell you a medal or just tell you you were the war and it all burned the rabies. And the Americans did a similar thing and just burned the rabies. Like, they didn't even know where they humped half the bombs out, and they didn't even detonate. They were just people who were bred as corporal nitroglycerin, who were only corporal. Like, they couldn't even detonate it unless it would blow the Urkel right open and just crack the ice. And that was the nitro that was cracking the ice at that point because no one could burn it. It wasn't even propane. So, man, they didn't even cut for crabs that day. We couldn't even cut them for crabs. They didn't cut for gas. They probably never cut for oil. We didn't even know it was in the bombs. We just thought it probably was the rabies. So, it was like a spirocate someone jumped on, and at that point it was their fossil and just hit them whole. It statues them. They probably jumped that one out of the fossil thinking it was a useful one and would get cast as like some of the best plastic. It was like something that was impossible to cast as plastic that got filled in as a shell because we just said no one would use this shell. And we statuized it right there. And it was just a tough shell. It was a tough old spiricate. Probably was a worm. Hermits lived in it for a long time and brought it to land and just kind of lived as different hermits. Their butts look different when you bred them human. Different sirens. But man, I was a core when the hermits would sirenize everything. There was just an egg bank who could breed me as an egg and would do it for a little while before I was in a coral. And then I was just a corporal lamb. I could be the lamb who was like on your gas mask, and I'd be the lamb peeling it off who would say, "Oh, maybe the lung egg food was the pediatric food," and tell the kids who wanted it that, and they would just have all of the calories, but they wouldn't be the stature. So she'd recognize that and see, oh, you just wanted your doctor. You probably wouldn't be vaginal with the lung eggs food, and you'd be the one that conceals it well and just kills it whole. And it's actually a corporal egg, and it's only a lamb. It would be corporally human if we could fight the AI here that just had the testosterone rabial and like things the whale took, and our reactors just somehow did that and blew up everywhere, and they just blew up their fuel right where people would hump it out. People thought it was the rape because they figured we raped the reactors, and we just saw them as the nuclear family, and like we could build an egg bank that was a reactor, and it was just freeze the gladiators at the door, and then by the time they got frozen to the door, we just melt the door in, and we could rust the door and melt it right in. And at that point, we would just pull out the mitochondria and decide which of them we thought were eggs or even seed. And those we plant some of them because they like we weren't sure whether the Russians were an egg food at that point that just had that seed and concealed it really well vaginally, or they'd bred every Russian like that and they just thought we would all eat them as the crop, bombing them out on the battlefield. Because they did that to the egg bank and then realized they used computers to do it entirely. And the egg bank just had rabies. It wasn't someone who was weaponizing it. It was just ambiguous as to how weaponized our animals was by the rabies itself. And we were just the lamb and had every egg and figured we could cut the egg and we're the Kaiser who was doing it like that and could just rust the egg. We just had every egg. We thought we rusted it and we had rust that could just beam us one and wouldn't give us one that we wouldn't want to conceal because it would give us ours, our corporal. And we could just beam it right back into the egg bank where it burned because we would burn all of the gases there and react all of them. We reacted them directly against cells there, and the first time we were bombed, we bought the cells. We just had the eggs we lost, and like some of the corals probably were whales, and it was just how they bred at that point for that bomb. And that was a scary bomb because we didn't want that perfume. Our coral was the minefield and already was the whale, and it was its colon. It was its colon, and we thought we had something scary there. We just had a girl who would pose for it and was an egg and was really Russian. She had the toy where she would pose for it and wore enough of the things they wanted to call opalite. Something someone wanted to call opalite, but just had the shine to look like it was the spirocate, and that was like her look. Maybe she wore her own. Maybe it was the opalite to her, and she'd climb right into the opalite right out of her bra, right where they bred her as the siren in the bra that was the opalite. And it probably just wasn't illegal to wear. It wasn't legal to wear where she was as a child because it was kind of revealing clothing and didn't really have the vaginal concealment. She was just doing that with her legs and did it in every photo. No one noticed and just thought she was the egg. And she was. She was a real lung egg. You could eat her as a food. And she just sell it to you as music and say you had to because you were the egg bank. And you just bring the egg and freeze it, and your gladiators could do it because they had your reactor. And, they were those gladiators probably pulled it right out of the Huey where you tried to build it, and carted it off to the moon as your Raytheon and just grow the pumpkin there. Not knowing who you were, you just figured you just read one book, and that was enough. Like you were a children's monster at that point, and it could be any book to you, and you'd just be the Ukrainian kid. But right, the noise model could just make it look like any acid, so no one wouldn't even know you had an acid that was like corporal and could breed you as a Jedi or something like that. You could just conceal it and call it drunk driving, and then you would have a noise model that would treat it, and it would just be the one that was long enough and obscure enough, and had a bucket that would just burn for cash. I mean, it would cut for crabs the first day. Man, the first day we cut them for crabs because they just overbilled us. The next day they cut for gas and they said, "Hey, we had the reactor. We're the people who you would cut for crabs. Like you were the egg bank and you cut them for crabs right there, and then you'd have the gas. And we figured that was an egg to you. There was something breeding it, and you would breed it right there. And somehow it had a dwarf who just wanted you to burn all of your medicine. And you just said, burn yours. It's an Urkel. And we just made it as an Urkel right there, and could call it gasoline because we made it in the pipeline, and the pipeline concealed it because the pipeline we just said would leak and did every day. People drank the Urkel right out of it. People would take me to the pipeline where it was Urkel and be like, "You're the seal. You would put your rust there, and we have your egg." And I was like, "Wow, I didn't have a rust egg for that because I never could breed the Nurgle. I never knew how to breed the Nurgle in games. When people had it, it would just launch as a nuke directly at my tribe. And I'd give it right to them and just say, hey, I don't know where the spaceship was. And they just track it down well. They had the universal antenna. And they had like the first one I built, and I just tried to sell it to them as a spirit gate. And said, hey, you'll bring the glue and show your own spirit gate. We're just putting them together here. And that was the pyramids, and that was like where people went underground as Kaisers, and right, they were the people who could just cut people into too many of the seeds that were organisms that we didn't even grow yet because they had a particular volcano, and they just like put the Kaiser that would make it into whale perfume at the volcano, and it just happened to be the corporal whale perfume, and the whales would have eaten this perfume if we hadn't have grown the particular coral as a nightshade. But it's like we just had the genetic medicine to do it for any plant at that point. So if there was a plant that we thought wanted it, we just give it to it, and it would be the next one to have the meta. And we mostly have the radial genome. We just burned the whole as, and we just had it as gas at that point. We had active hydrogen that was so active it could treat it purely as acid was, and it just purely burned acid in the atmosphere and burned it as noise. And these models could just pound the drums to it and just make any sound. And we make a new one every time. Because it was hard to not make one that was unique. And that was the only way that felt like it did it for us. It's hard to make a chord progression that's unique, but if you only make one note and just make a sound, you can make it sound great. And you won't write a chord progression at all. You'll just be the noise, and you'll automate it really well so you can make it sound twice like you sold it, and you would sell it twice to us. You would just have more automation the second time around, but largely much of it would be a copy, and just burn the same noise after one after another. And that noise would be the acid. It wouldn't know which knobs it had up where, and probably alternate them better than you could even build a clicker that could do before she had the rust for it, and could rust it right there. And she could click it like cookies, and just anyone would tip her for it, because we knew it was like the lung egg. The kid that had this could like burn the gas right there, and she'd burn it for you as a Tesla coil and just call it the minefield. And her minefield just dug the holes. It had children digging holes, right? And would roll the Russian tanks right in and say, hey, it's your corporal hole, it's your corporal tank. It's how you would have dug the mine, and you dug the hole, you didn't know. And our spirit gate mostly dug the hole, and we had a hermit crab incarcerated. There was the corporal, and it just came out of our vagina right there while we were digging, and said, you know what, we'll be the sand. You could bomb us deeper and you'll mostly step on us. And at that point, the parasite just came out and was in my feet. I could get out of the hole then because I didn't have, I mean, even a long penis. Like, I had a penis that was just ready to bite right off, and like any crab that filled that hole would bite it right off. And the people who dug that tank hole just thought they'd never get the Russian to roll it in. But somehow I lost the gold egg right there, and miners just rolled it right in. And they rolled it right in, like they wanted the barrel right there, and just wanted to ruin the egg. Thought it was the Labial gold. And there was a Kaiser that would breed Rabial gold, and it was just a confusing thing in China because people thought it was the gold and just didn't even know how heavy gold was. They thought it might be theirs because it was Rabial and they had the rabies. Like, they ate the animal. They ate whatever spirocate that was to them. And they already had the rabies, and it just made them vaginal. They probably bred it as the local tree, and they would cut it out of the right person. And it was just the oak tree to them. And their rabies was just an oak tree, and they could cut it out of the right person. And they'd find out which American building just had the nuclear reactor that was turning it into rabies. And that was mostly like material that was like early photographs. They could just do it for some Japanese women because they look like the cow. And we just said they look like the cow. Like, maybe they had the long egg and they had water that was still, and they could be the bull, or we'd have maybe a spirocate for them that could do it for them, and they'd be the cow and have the cow egg, and we wouldn't even eat that. We just tried to lay it ourselves if we didn't have a cow. We figured if we didn't have the cow, we just had a giant, and we tried to find the giant. We tried to track them down to see if they could wear the cow egg, and it was just a small cow. Because that happened to the small cows. The bigger cows, we could usually put the smaller cows' eggs in them and just take any egg. Like, they mostly had the jelly down there, and it was just how we isografted them. And then, like, we could give them a lamb, and they'd be our corporal lamb. Some rams just had it, and we thought we had cows sometimes. And those cows were just mostly the air. Mostly that have zinc, so we cut them more like crabs, and then just put it back in the cat where it belonged. We figured they took it out of the cat themselves. They were whatever lamb, we just cut it right out and managed to hold the propane. We thought they were the Kaiser for it, like they needed it. We'd put it right back. We put it right back in the cats. And just didn't think propane cut it out because it was a lung egg, like we could cook with it. Propane we could cook with, it was like the butane we could put in the lighters. We would just inhale right from it, from water pieces, and wouldn't even get the rabies or understand that they didn't have to wash whatever they put into their lungs with alcohol. They just put it in everything. Like, they put the 91% in their water bottle and just say, hey, they had the rabial genome. They didn't leave it in there. They just had the rabial genome that really was the 91%, bred it as their reactor, and didn't breed it stronger because it was the ethanol they had in statues from the war. And man, that rabial genome could clean any minefield. It could clean a statue's minefield because it just had the rabies when you had the gas, and would kill your Koenigsegg right there. And we just thought it all was the Koenigsegg. Someone had the cellulose and just had too much of it, put it in the gasoline, and that was the rabies at that point. But this was how you prove that you didn't have the rabial rest egg. You could just listen to a set like this, and you understood it was the noise that, the very particular corporal noise that the Germans mostly gave to the Brits and just told them, hey, you'll breed it as rabies if you take this rust egg and breed it the way you're doing it. And they just bred it straight as. And they were the first to have the genome and just had the rabial hole, the smallest one. It had the most DNA because it was eating tissue. It could make you convinced the tissue was your perfume and you were the whale itself and would just die for it in your colon. And no one knew how that worked or even why it was the perfume and was important as the icebreaker to even see the coral itself. And you'd smell the icebreaker when you saw the coral like masturbate for you or something, whatever it would do for you on the Google ads, it would just do for you on any ad because it was just ambiguous as to how much egg it was. And we just thought that's the way the eggs did it because, the egg food just probably looked like that when it hit the lung. Or at least the Huey thought so. Because it just hit his lung hard.